Hey guys, I wanted to put together a quick video to show you how to repair your Polaris PA25 robotic pool cleaner. So if your pool cleaner, the pump motor turns on and it's pushing water, but it's just not driving around the bottom of your pool, it's likely that you've got stripped gears in the gearbox of one of your tracks. This is a really common problem, but luckily it's also a really easy and really inexpensive problem to fix. So if you take this to your local pool store, or try to buy replacement parts from Polaris, they're going to charge you like $250, maybe $300 for a replacement gearbox. I'm going to put a link in the description to some 3D printed replacement gears that I sell on my Etsy shop, which is a lot more affordable way to repair this problem. And this is a pretty easy install, so even a novice, DIYer should be able to handle this repair without a problem. So I hope you enjoyed the video. And feel free to leave any comments or questions down in the description. And again, I'll leave a link to where you can find the replacement parts in the description of this video. The tools we're going to need for this repair, I'll quickly go through that. You're going to want a cordless drill like this shown below. So nothing crazy, just a small drill to drive screws with, do just fine. A pretty long number 2 Phillips head drill bits. There's some screws that are a little tricky to get to, so a longer drill bit will be helpful. A standard length number 2 Phillips head drill bit. Your favorite flathead screwdriver, just to use for some prying. And then I'll link this down in the video description, but these are the replacement gears that are available in my Etsy shop on the Make Surf Should Make Etsy shop. So these will replace the stripped drive gears in your gearbox. So watch this video. I'd recommend taking apart your pool cleaner and just making sure that those gears are in fact damaged before you order these. But there'll be a link down below in the video description. These are 3D printed replacement gears. So we'll start with the disassembly. Okay, so we got a nice clean workbench to start with. We'll have a lot of screws and some smaller parts to deal with, so it's a good idea to make sure that you've got a nice, clean, organized space to begin. This is a pretty easy repair, so don't let this be intimidating. This is pretty straightforward. Always make sure the pool cleaner is unplugged before you begin any work. Go ahead and remove that top filter basket housing. And then we're going to turn the pool cleaner on its side. Grab that flathead screwdriver, and you're going to put it underneath the axles of these wheels, and you're just going to gently pry up. You may have to switch from side to side and just gently pry up to pop those axles out, but you're going to want to remove those axles from both sides of both of those rollers on either side. So I'm removing the two on this side of the track assembly. And then I'm going to flip this over and remove the other two from the other side of the track assembly. There's no need to remove the axles from that center, or I guess the upper idler wheel. That can stay in place. Once you remove that second set of axles, that brush roller is going to come loose, and you can just set both of those rollers aside for now. We'll set all those axles to the side. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our drill driver and we're going to install that longer Phillips head driver bit. And we're going to remove this upper kind of floating handle assembly. So there's a screw, there's one on either side. So you pop that screw out. Notice all these screws. So one great thing about this repair is every single screw that we're going to remove today is identical. So you don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. I like to keep all the fasteners in a little cup just to keep things organized. Flip the handle over. You're going to remove the screw from the opposite side of the handle. Again, I'm going to turn it over, knock that loose, and just taking care to keep track of all the screws we remove so that we can put them all back in when we're done. I'm going to kind of pull these sides up of the handle apart and remove it from those posts. You can kind of see I can bend those back to remove that handle. Then we're going to go in again with the long Phillips head bit on the screwdriver or drill, and we're going to remove the two screws that hold the impeller cover on. That's that gray piece in the middle. So I've removed those 2 screws, set those aside. This can be a little difficult to remove, so it may take a little bit of wiggling back and forth to remove that housing, but it should come right off. And then we're going to remove the impeller. So we'll take that flathead screwdriver, place it underneath the impeller, kind of between the impeller and the motor housing, and just pop that impeller straight off. May take a little bit of force, so be careful, but when you remove it, it'll slide right off of that shaft. There's no pins or anything holding it in place. Okay, so now the pump impeller is removed. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to swap over to that shorter Phillips head bit. There's some screws that we're going to have to get to that are a little, there's not much clearance, and so the shorter bit will help. You can also just use a screwdriver if you wanted to too, but I definitely prefer power tools anytime I have the chance to use them. So there'll be 2 screws on either side. We're going to remove those 2 screws, stash them aside. Sometimes they're a little tricky to fall out, so just, again, keep track of them, stash them in a little cup. Same for the other side. And now we're going to turn this up on end, flip it upside down, and there's 4 screws on this kind of black bottom plate that hold the track assemblies on. And so there's no need to remove the drive belt or the belt at all, or the tracks, I guess you call it. You can just kind of pull those aside and get your screwdriver in there, your drill, and remove. There's 2 screws on either side. Let's come right out, and then once that's off, that whole bottom plate pops right off. And then we'll carefully set that aside. Okay, so now the track assemblies should be loose, but there's 2 more things we have to remove before we can take those off completely. And so we're going to take off those white covers on either side of the robot. There's just 2 screws for each kind of panel. Those pop right back off. I don't believe it matters when you put this back together. I don't think it matters which panel goes on which side. I think they're both kind of symmetrical. They're all the same, so no need to worry about like marking the orientation of those. I'm going to flip the robot over to the other side and just do the exact same thing. Again, just 2 Phillips head screws on the faceplate. I'm really thankful that Polaris decided to use the same fastener throughout this entire robot. So it makes our lives easier. You don't have to remember, which screw went where, different lengths, different sizes. They're all the same. And also kind of clever on their part, keeps, inventory management a little simpler. They don't have to worry about, stocking multiple screws on the assembly line. Just simplifies everything on their end. So smart move by them. So now we got the track assembly removed. Obviously, there's 2 track assemblies. Notice this one does not have a keyed hole for a drive shaft. So that's the non-driven side of the robot. You'll also notice that there's a kind of like a drawn, engraved pattern for how this cord gets routed around those screw bosses. So it's really important when you put this back together that you kind of follow that arrow just to make sure the cord wraps around there and is properly strain relieved. So when you go to yank this thing out of the pool, you don't put any stress on the connection. This is the gearbox side we're interested in. So this one has the kind of the input drive shaft. You can see it's got a little notch for a keyway or a little pin. And then there's the output of the gearbox. So there's the output shaft, and there's this little pin that sits in that through that hole. Go ahead and remove that because that'll, if you don't want it to fall out and get lost, I'll go ahead and set that in the cup. And I've got a good trick later for when you reassemble it on how to kind of keep that from falling out whenever you go to reassemble this thing. So we'll set the main part of the pool cleaner aside, and we're going to focus on this track assembly now. So we're going to put it, there's 4 screws that hold this thing together. Point them out here. Again, short Phillips head bit. And I'm going to go ahead and remove all 4 of those screws. So now all 4 of those screws are loosened up. I'm going to try my best to recover those screws and stash them in the cup so we don't lose them. But this black back plate comes off of the lower gearbox assembly. Turn it upside down here. Careful not to let those disappear. But you can see, get those screws removed. Stash them away safe in the cup. Okay, so you should have 4 screws there. All right, now we're into the good stuff. So you'll be able to see here that there's 2 gears, the ones that contact the drive wheels on this particular robot are totally shredded. This is the second robot I've personally taken apart that this has happened to. And I've sold many sets of gears to customers on Etsy that have had this same problem. So you can see those outer 2 white gears are just totally torn apart. Fun fact, that gear is actually the same as the set of gears just on the inside of that. So there's I guess basically 4 out of those 5 white nylon gears are identical with the exception of that very center gear. So that's what a shredded one looks like. You can see the teeth are almost completely gone on that thing. It's really bad. That's what a good one should look like. Typically, I've only seen so far those outer 2 gears being worn. This is a side-by-side of the worn gear and then the new replacement gear. Again, there'll be a link in the description for where you can purchase those. And we're simply just going to remove those and swap them out with the worn gears. So it's that simple. Once we get these new gears in place, it's just a matter of reassembling everything and hopefully be back up and running. So you kind of have to pull that outer, wheel that engages on the track out just a little bit so that you can install the new replacement gear. Yes, we'll get rid of that, grab our new replacement gear, and kind of drop that in place. Like I said, you have to kind of lift the outer gear out of the way, and it helps to remove the gears just on the inside of that. So I guess the kind of intermediate gears, it helps to take those out when you install the new blue replacement gears. And then once it's installed, put that intermediate gear back in. Same thing here. I'm going to lift up on the track wheel thing. I don't know what you call it. Pull the old gear out. I'm going to remove that intermediate gear. And drop in the new replacement gear into its spot there. Put the good intermediate gear back in, and that's it. Gearbox has been reassembled with the correct gears. These don't need, I guess you could lubricate them if you wanted to, but all this stuff is going to be, flooded with water, so if you do use some kind of grease, I guess it's going to have to be like a waterproof lubricant. Not to mention, if you do lubricate those components, it's probably just going to cause sand and leaves and what other trash that's in your pool to stick to those parts and pieces. So once we have those gears replaced, we're going to go ahead and set this gray cover back on and reassemble. Reassembly is really straightforward. It's literally just the opposite of how you took it apart. You could just watch this video backwards, but so just a quick pro tip. I like to take a drill that's got like an adjustable torque setting, and on this particular drill I set it all the way down to its lowest setting, number 1, because these stainless Phillips head screws are they like to strip out pretty easily, so that just lets you assemble this thing without worrying about over tightening the screws, stripping out the threads or stripping out the head of the screw. And so I'll probably stop talking for most of this, and you can just kind of watch the reassembly again. It's just like it went, just like you took it apart, it goes back together. Pretty straightforward. All right, real quick, I'll just show you what the other gearbox looks like if you're curious. So the one that we just rebuilt is the only one that actually has gears in it. The other side is just kind of a dummy track. So there's only one, motor. You can see there's no gears in this side. There's only one drive motor on this unit, so both tracks aren't necessarily driven, but they transmit power through those foam or through those brush rollers that we removed in the first step. So for the reassembly, we'll go ahead and put kind of the main unit of the robot back on the workbench. And here's a little tip. I like to use some Vaseline or some kind of grease, some kind of thick grease that I'll apply to the output shaft of the track motor. Not necessarily for lubrication, but simply just to hold that keyway pin thing into place. The thick grease kind of helps glue that little pin in place so that whenever you go to put the track assembly back on, you're not having to worry about constantly knocking that thing out of the hole. All right, so now I'm going to slide that pin into place on the output shaft. And then I'm going to grab that track assembly. And remember, we're looking for the track assembly that has this slotted input shaft. So this is the one that did have the gears in it that we just rebuilt. And it's important to make sure that you position that slotted input shaft in an orientation that matches up with the pin on the motor output shaft. So you can see I just kind of turned the gearbox by hand there by rotating the track around until I got it kind of in the ballpark. And then when you set this thing on onto kind of the chassis, the robot, that pin should line up. The pin should line up, and that should just drop right in place. Then we're just going to take 2 screws that we had removed before and kind of fasten the upper portion of the track back into place. We'll do that for both sides. Now for the second track, this is the track without the gears in it. Like I mentioned before, it's important to note the orientation of this this wire so that it's properly strain relieved. So it's really simple. Just follow the markings on the side of the box. Put that wire in place, and then when you put the gearbox back on top and you tighten those screws, it'll kind of pinch the gray cover of that wire in place to keep you from tugging it apart. And then I'll fast forward through most of this. It's just, again, reassembling just the same way you took it apart. We'll put that lower plate back on, 4 screws on the bottom. We're going to put these plastic, fairings on either side. There's just 2 screws per side. The ends of those do have to line up with little notches on the chassis. You'll see what I mean when you do this. But just 2 screws per side. Zip one in there. Zip one in there. And that's back together. Now I'm going to go and install the impeller. I like to put just a little bit of grease, kind of wipe off the impeller, the output shaft of the impeller motor. Maybe put a little bit of Vaseline or grease on that so it's easier to remove next time. And then just make sure you line up that flat on the impeller with the flat on the output shaft. And it simply just pushes on in place. So just pop that on. Then we'll grab the impeller housing cover. I thought it was nice to put a little bit of Vaseline on the inside of this thing just to make disassembly in the future a little easier. Mine originally was kind of seized in place. There's just 2 screws that hold that in. You'll need that long drill bit, again, to tighten those screws up. And then we're getting here, we're close to the home stretch here. We just got to mount the handle. So kind of spread it apart, put it over the posts, 1 screw per side, and you're done. And now we're going to put the rollers on. So the rollers, this you got to note, there's a couple things to note here. So that the axles will key into those square kind of bosses on either side of the roller. And so when you go to push these in, it's important that you line the square hole up with the square post on the roller. But additionally, those shafts or those axles have little keyways on the kind of the side that's underneath the head, I guess you'd call it. Those need to line up with the wheels. And so just be careful. Take your time when you install these. I like to put a little Vaseline on those just to make them easier to remove in the future. But just make sure that you line that square output shaft up with the roller, and then you line that little groove up with the wheels. Pop the filter housing back on, and you are all finished up. So I hope you found this video useful. I hope this solves your problem. Again, there'll be a link to the replacement gears down in the description. They'll be on my Etsy shop. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them below in the comments. But again, thanks for watching, and good luck with your repair.